Okay. Welcome everyone to the bi-weekly IPLD meeting. It's December the 10th, 2018. We already have a note taker, which is Eric. He volunteered to do it. And then please put your names on the attendees list if you attend this meeting, and your updates if you have any at the bottom. I guess, as I don't see any particular agenda items, we just start with the updates, and then we go from there if we have anything to discuss. All right, so let's start with Eric.
Okay, I'm going to try to give a super short form of mine because I could also talk about it quite a bit, and I'd like to ask for feedback on some things. So the short form is I've done implementing some drafts of what IPLD schemas could look like. That's a big topic. So I'm trying to do something that's very basic and very easy to reach for, that covers well-known topics like sum types, aka unions, product types, aka structs, and like the most limited recursive types, maps and arrays, and come up with a very basic validate method that can take a schema, apply it to some data, and be like, yes or no. So I've got some early drafts on that, and I've got a hypothetical DSL sort of syntax, which I'm not going to take too seriously anytime soon, but it's just something that we could look at, and it would be conversation starty. And I'm trying to implement this stuff and make sure that I don't hit any huge like icebergs in the process. So, and I'd like to recruit some more people to talk about that and review stuff in case opinions. And that's what I've been up to.
All right. Okay.
I have a discussion point that I wanted to bring up later that will greatly affect that. So I don't have a comment now because I don't want to derail this whole period of comments on your potential schema thing. But like there will be something later. We'll loop back in on that.
I have a question, and I hope I don't derail the whole thing. Is do you also like? Is it also about how we then know which data has which schema? Because even if you have a schema, you need to somehow connect the schema to the actual data. So does your proposal also include this part, or it's just about the schema? All right, cool.
Yeah, I'm assuming a very structural style of type system where it's all, we have some pre-existing data.
We'll see if we cool. All right.
In.
All right, so who's next on the list? Oh, it's me. So I've mostly just playing around with the new JavaScript IPLD API to build DAG protocol buffers to see how it looks like in the new format. And then also now I'm working on the JS IPLD stuff. And then I will combine the both to see if it works, but it looks good so far, I think. And yeah, this is probably also what I will do next week, I guess, because I'm super excited about it and I'm making good progress. All right. So please, if anyone has any questions at any point, just raise your hands and then. Yeah. All right, next one is Aiden. Aiden seems to be frozen, so I go to the next one, which is Steven.
Most of my IPLD related. Can you actually hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Most of my IPLD related work has been trying to convince Swarm people to use the IDs in their in ENS Ethereum name system, because that will allow you to link to any IPLD like data or any Merkle DAG really. So, but we have to talk to them because like, they really want to have some form of location addressing, or at least something that indicates that, hey, like this data lives in Swarm. I'm trying to convince them, hey, like it doesn't have to. You can address it by content and then like include some hint somewhere. But yeah, so we're trying to figure that out, trying to make it efficient and like content addressed, I guess. So. can check out the issue.
All right. Aiden, back to you.
Yeah. So yeah, last week was just doing some playing around with using IPLD to pass messages around instead of using protobufs. Thank you for everybody helping me figure out what I was doing wrong. That was appreciated. I'm still following the libp2p roadmap stuff to see where that lies with using, having an RPC library or some sort of message passing-y thing that makes it easy to move messages around, even with between JavaScript and Go. And I'm waiting if anybody else has more comments on my the interface for replicating a version graph. That'd be useful. But I will probably loop back to doing implementation stuff on that at some point. But now that I have a basic one working, I'm focusing on other things for now.
Cool. Is there anyone else on the list? Michael.
Steve is up first, though. Steven, you skipped over.
Steven already had his update.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. That's my bad. All right. I was going by the list. Okay. All right. So I've been trying to do OKRs. So kicking that off for Q1, wrapping up Q4, also doing the yearly OKR. So those are all in individual issues that y'all should have seen. So I'm landing the second piece of the Unix SV2 spec next week, which should make it which basically makes it complete enough to go and implement. It does not have all of the really contentious things figured out, like, how we represent permissions and stuff like that, but we can effectively punt on that into the future. But there is one exception that I'll get to in a little bit. I updated the draft implementation that I had written in JavaScript, so that actually uses all the new spec stuff now. I didn't have to. I wanted to go off and I wanted to test a hypothesis about how to store NPM data. And so I wanted to use the new draft spec when I did that. And so I ended up updating it for that. So it got updated a little bit earlier than normal. Also did the budgeting, which we can talk about sort of offline, non-public for all this stuff. One kind of big thing to talk about, though, is that we are engaging with someone to take on the work of doing IETF spec compliance and all the process work to get some stuff through the IETF for multi-formats. And we're actually going to do multi-hash and CID together. So there'll be basically CID will be the spec that we're pushing, and then there will also be a spec for multi-hash that we are depending on, and sort of the process will be like, oh, there's a normative dependency here. That's why these things are going to push through. We've had a lot of good conversations already with who's going to drive this, who's done somebody who's done a lot of IETF spec work in the past, including HTTP2. So another really interesting thing here is that, so the codec registry stuff that we have currently, I thought that it was going to be a huge amount of work to figure out what does governance look like and blah, blah, blah. It turns out that if you have a registry requirement in an IETF spec, you just say, hey, I need an IANA registry for this. And you just put that in the spec. And then when the spec gets finalized, you automatically get an IANA registry. And as part of that process, you basically assign experts to it. And there is an expert review for adding anything to the registry. So there actually isn't a ton of work there, and we will eventually get an IANA registry. But that's something to think about. It will not just be pull requests to a CSV file at some point in time for these codec registries. We will actually have some kind of governance around them. And then we'll just be sending pull requests to update the CSV after they land in the IANA registry. Cool. So yeah. The big change that I want to talk about now that we're through all the updates, I just put this in a comment, but it's something that I was thinking about all weekend. Based on some of the comments that Stephen had a little while back about how we might compress the representation of files. So if you have a really small file, just inlining the binary objects rather than always linking to them. That got me thinking about in some of the other interfaces that we're doing around IPLD, we are trying to move people towards just looking at paths rather than trying to think about things at a block level. One thing that we could do is actually change the Unix SV2 spec right now, it basically thinks about things as a block is an object, and here are what the patterns are in each individual block and object. Instead, we could move to a spec that just talked about the paths and what each path means, and just say any path could actually end up being a link if it's to like an object or an array. Obviously, like it can't just be to a string because we can't represent that. But that would free up like a lot of different ways to build tree structures. For instance, you could actually, if you have a really small directory of small files, you could compact the entire thing into one block rather than doing multiple blocks. There are like a huge amount of trade-offs to think about here. And we would also have to carve out an exception for HAMP and just say like, also any of these namespaces can be HAMPs or whatever. But yeah, it would be a sizable change, but may end up opening up a lot of performance optimizations that people could do in the future. I saw Steven's hand go up.
Basically, my point was that we can be link agnostic, where we just say, look, the links are transparent, you just traverse them. You have a big, like, effectively, we have one big object that maybe broke up into blocks. But the other point I had was like, or sorry, the other question I had was something about strings and not being able to pass them. What was that?
Yeah. So I don't think that you can create like a CBOR object that is just a string, right?
You can.
You can? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought that was just binary, just a string, just a CID if you really want to get nasty.
Ouch. Okay. All right. Well, no, that's interesting though. Okay. Well, yeah. Then fuck it. We could just have it be transparent. Yeah, that wouldn't matter. Okay. Cool.
But just, I think it can be a string, but I think the canonical CBOR doesn't allow a string. And currently, we require IPLD canonical CBOR, but that's a detail.
I've never seen that required, but I can check.
I think. But anyway, that's like at least CBOR definitely supports having strings as a top level type.
But I wanted to point out this does require. If we do this, we have to move from supporting just CIDs to full links in IPLD objects. Where like not all IPLD objects will support this, but CBOR at least needs to, because like otherwise, like I don't want to have some object and like need to like include one file of that object in a different directory, and then have to like pull that file with that subdirectory out of the object. Does that make sense?
Well, so you may. I think like that's effectively what this would end up doing, right? Because we would literally be saying that that file object may just be a link or may not be a link, and you may actually have to pull it out and create a new object for it.
So the other way to do this is you can just like, instead of having just CIDs be pointers, or sorry, only like pointing to an entire block, you have to point inside the block, which I think is going to be important. Anyways.
Yeah. That's a sizable change.
Yeah, although it's backwards compatible, we can easily, forwards compatible, I guess. Or like if objects don't have these extra links, you won't be able to interpret. If they have the extra links, you'll be able to interpret them. But we can literally just concatenate a link with the CID, and that should just work. There are probably better ways of doing this, but what fork is anyways.
Even if the ability to represent all of those things, what kind of tools would we have that would actually think about the universe so totally completely that it would decide to use interesting link structures like that?
A lot of them. I had MFS and I have my file and it's in a directory, and then I say like copy this file over here. Like the MFS would it would basically simplify the link to like the shortest link it could get, which would be like QM whatever / some very short path, and then it would like put that in as the link to the file in like the other directory.
So does this imply that my new tree root for that whole thing would be a function statefully of the previous tree contents?
Not statefully, no. But like you would just point inside of that other block, basically.
Yeah. So I think that we should probably create a thread in the specs repo about like a link spec or like a link v2 spec or something, and just say that CID is alone or link v1, where we start to specify out what the pathing structure is. And then in the Unix SV2 spec, we can just say like, this is a link, and at some point say also link v2, and then you can point into stuff. Yeah. I think the question for right now is like, and I think actually Eric's question may also be about the tools that end up creating these directories. How would they decide to make these trade-offs or not, like when they're parsing them? So to me, the more important thing is that the implementations for reading support this. Because in the future, this would allow parsers to make any kind of crazy trade-off that they want. Like a really good example of this, right, is that if you have a website, you know that they have to pull the index.html right away and then the rest of the resources. You could inline all of index.html into the first object in the root, and all the rest can still be in a big tree. So that they're going off and getting like, So like you can do things like optimize those loads if you have this feature available to you.
This also helps with things like metadata, where like currently we have this problem, like we don't want to put the metadata in the file because then we change the file based on the metadata. And also like listing directories can be really slow if you have to like fetch every single file. So ideally we can put that in the directory itself. But if we put it in the directory itself, then like it's harder to just link to the file. But like if we stop caring about like these link boundaries and we can just like link to like the basically the correct location in that directory, so the correct directory entry, and have that be the beginning of the file that then points to the file data. This allows us to like make these optimizations. But
I'm still a lot of side to this. Like we already have that issue you opened, Stabilian, about reproducible file imports, and we are so very many light years away from having that well described and supported. There is a huge difference between content addressable and content plus historical content addressable.
What does that have to do with?
If we end up with systems that are creating these links based on some kind of advanced optimizations based on already uploaded data or something,
I see.
That is not addressable.
Well, no, it's not. Okay, so we're always going to have issues. It is content addressable. It's just like we may end up with different addresses for the same
like
content.
if you add the content again, you won't get the same.
Yes.
thing.
But I mean, frankly, Eric, like the moment that we say that you can represent this in two ways, we lose 100% reproducibility of the hashes, right? Like even just allowing hamps or objects in there right now means that you are never guaranteed that the exact same like the two hashes don't actually represent the same file structure, right?
And I desperately want us to fix that, and I consider it a bug in the current draft.
We can't do anything about this. Like we're gonna have this problem regardless, because like we want multiple ways of importing the same. Or say like we currently have like a trickle tag versus a regular tag, or versus like the balance tag, where we want to use a trickle tag when like we're appending to the file, or like you want to be able to like read it linearly, and you want to use the regular tag.
Potentially a bug, and we have never sufficiently studied whether or not people are actually using that. The only people I've heard claim that they're using it, I asked them privately if they were using it, and they said, we didn't really check if that mattered.
The issue here is that like all of the trade-offs that we would have to make for performance optimizations and how you build the trees, when we look at doing B trees, when we look at like even in files, right? When we start looking at like different chunkers and how like those get optimized, all of these require us to just like not always have 100% deduplication. Like you only get deduplication when people are creating the tree roughly the same way, or you're getting it only at the binary like block level in the chunk. Like if you're using the same chunker, but you don't get it for all the intermediary nodes. Like there's always going to be this trade-off. And I think that we're going to have to make it once we like start looking into like sorted collections and stuff anyway. So it's not as big a deal to me that we're making it now. And I mean, and the reality is like if you run IPFS, like IPFS is probably going to make the trade-off that like it wants to be as to deduplicate as much as possible. And so if you always run it with no options, you're always going to get the same thing, and they're always going to be hash compared. It's just opening up the opportunity to do it differently.
Also, remember the data size is mostly like large blocks. And that will always be in separate objects. Actually, that's one of the points of this idea. So the point is like one of the points here is like we can embed like all the metadata, all of like the stuff that differs and like wouldn't really be the same between different files in like a directory that's going to be different anyways. And then like the big pieces of data are just blocks at the end of it. It does mean you're gonna have separate hashes, which is not good, but I don't think there's anything we can do about that anyways. If you have a file system where like people are going to be adding random metadata, changing random things, where like you want to make it as reproducible as possible. And you also want to have options to allow people like say like do a reproducible minimal add of this data, where like it just uses like balanced import, all these very special like basically a subset of things, and won't give you the best chunking, won't give you the best duplication, but will give you like a perfectly reproducible thing that just works everywhere in any file. but like that's a use case, but not necessarily the only use case.
Yeah, I mean, like if you take like the index.html one, right, where we're optimizing by inlining all of that, like nobody's gonna have the exact same website as me, or at least I assume they don't have the exact same HTML as me. And so like I'm not as worried about duplication as I am of all of the sub resources, like all of the dependencies and all of the images and fonts and all the other shit that I link to in the site. Like that I need to duplicate it, right?
Well, I'm guessing your primary complaint is not really the duplication; it's more the like reproducibility. Like you want to get the same hash every time for the same identifier.
I mean, at this point, I would also be willing to rest my case by saying, yes, I agree with all of the above. But at this point, I don't think we have sufficiently enumerated all of the parameter spaces we have for break reproducibility. And it makes me super nervous to talk about doing more of them before even having made that enumeration, like had a first class conversation about how much we care.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do care about having reproducibility. This is also where that whole idea of like keeping track of all the parameters came in. For like if we could put this somewhere, then it makes sense slightly more reproducible. But like in my ideal world, we don't have to care about any of this because everything just goes back to this anyways. When you get a file, you already get it from IPFS, so there's no like multiple people importing data from outside of IPFS. We're not there yet. So
yeah, I also think that like for the reproducibility side, like that is an IPFS concern for the trees that it creates. And we have a lot more control there to change what we're using in the spec. Like we can always create these the exact same way, always use hamps for directories, like just make that trade-off and then they'll always be reproducible. We can limit the vectors by which we are like introducing on reproducibility in IPFS without containing what the spec can theoretically allow or what IPFS could theoretically parse, right?
I have
okay,
a
cool
question about the like the directories and metadata. Like what were you envisioning? It seemed like you were envisioning like sometimes people want to copy. Sometimes I want to send you a folder and I want you to take the metadata of the files with you, and like sometimes I don't. Is that what you're trying to allow for?
So the issue with the metadata is we have. Sorry, basically we're trying to get to duplication, where like, so yes, there are cases where people won't care about the metadata, in which case they'll remove it and it'll be fine. But there's a lot of cases where people want to add some small amount of metadata, where like it depends on who's adding, and that's the people that are talking really loudly. Can you hear me, or are you hearing too much background noise?
I can hear you.
I can hear you plus some ambient background noise. But
okay.
You're good.
Okay.
Both.
So the idea is, yeah, basically we need to be able to support deduplicating the data blocks, even if people have different like metadata. So this is where a large part of the motivation of like including the metadata directory comes from. The second half of the motivation is performance, where we want to be able to like fetch some of the metadata to be able to list the directory and like with the metadata. Most people won't be able to do that without fetching all of the actual data files. These are really where the two motivations come from. The other way of doing this is you can actually like, you can get the deduplication by just separating out the metadata in separate blocks, where you have like directory listing, metadata, and then data blocks. But that has a massive performance hit, so you have these tiny little metadata blocks where you have to go like fetch them and then fetch the regular blocks. The nice thing about like start saying, okay, forget the blocks, we just have a graph, or really we have like we have a DAG. Is that then you can just like move this data wherever you need to go for performance reasons, and you optimize that at the block level, and then at the graph level, you can just look at it as like one big completed graph. It's not like we've actually talked about like going like a step further in the past, where like we actually like build in a sharding concept to IPLD itself, for like a special like sharded map, sharded array and stuff like that. We actually decided to move away from that because it was too like we're building too many things into IPLD. And now we're planning to have like a small layer on top of that with IPLD. Just said that Unix is going to use to do that kind of stuff. But are you frozen? No, okay.
I cut out for some of that because my internet was misbehaving. But I'm wondering if, right, like if you can always send the metadata separately in a sense, right? Like you can have like a tree in the same way that if you were constrained to not be allowed to, you can only put primitives into a map, right? Well, you can still store a struct in a map by just having like a sequence of maps that each contain one of the fields in the struct.
Oh, so you're saying you can have it, we call it like a side tree or something, but like you have like two trees where you have one with the data and then a metadata tree, and you can join them to the root. You could do that. That gets like tricky to link to, because now like you want to like, someone wants to include like a sub part of the graph. Now you need to like create this new join node. Does that make sense? Or like you want to like include some file or some subtree. Now you need to like pull out the subtree from both graphs and then create a join node to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, it's very use case dependent in terms of, I want this thing to be content addressable with and without this particular chunk of data added to it.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's,
you can't sort of have your cake and eat it too and have it. But you can, I don't know, I feel like if I understood better what the use cases were of like when we want those and when we didn't, right, then we'd know how much we cared.
Well, this is also the thing about like pulling or separating the data blocks from the rest of the tree, is then at least we can deduplicate the data blocks. This does cause a problem for content routing, where it's much like if I had the entire tree, it's much easier just to have like everyone like tell or announce the world they have the entire tree. So then that content routing just works beautifully. You can't really like, we're currently announcing every single block, but that's not going to work for us long term. But sorry, Volker, I think we're getting off topic.
Yeah, just do we have any other items, because we already have the we are running out of time. So is there anything else?
Very briefly, Dynamic Data is meeting with the textile folks this week. They will have their own data structures and stuff that they're trying to figure out what we can do and what ways to work together. I'll try and report back next time with info from that.
Cool. Steven?
What is that meeting?
It's on Thursday.
Got it.
I'll send you an invite.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think we might want to talk about the offline inbox thing.
Sounds good.
All right. Anything else? Eric?
Does anybody want to take a skim over the theme proposition, or are we just way out of time for that?
So I would probably take it offline, I guess, and then we just comment on the gist, I guess, if that's okay. I mean, like of course, like people can stay around if they want, like, I know, but I would officially end the meeting and then.
Okay, well, the guest link is there, so if people want to comment on that or use the IRC channel maybe to discuss for the IPLD, in that IRC channel.
Yeah. Cool. All right, then thanks everyone for attending, and we'll probably won't see us in 2 weeks because I don't want to meet on Christmas. So let's meet again in 4 weeks. Then. Yeah. All right.
I assume we may meet earlier too. Well, okay.
Yeah, or just like probably we meet some like on IRC or wherever, or I don't know. Yeah. That's
okay.
Stuff. Okay. Right. Oh, then I can wish a happy new year when we meet in 4 weeks, and happy Christmas. See you in 4 weeks.